The final tradition which we place within the way of justice and liberation is Islam. Islam prides itself on the idea that, unlike the other great monotheisms, it emerged in the clear light of history. A middling Meccan merchant of the Quraysh tribe began to have visions. He consulted his wife for fear that he was losing his mind, but she reassured him that the visions were authentic. These visions, which he had been commanded to write down, were eventually compiled as the Quran. He then began public preaching, calling on the people of Mecca to reject their polytheistic religion and to return to what he claimed was their original monotheism. The Meccans rejected him, so he fled north to Yathrib and established himself there as a prophet and as de facto leader of the city. Within his lifetime, the Arab tribes he converted united much of the Arabian Peninsula. Within a generation, Islam had liberated most of the eastern Mediterranean and western Asia, and within another century it had built one of the largest empires known to humanity. Unfortunately, like the stories which Jews and Christians tell about their origins, this story is simply untenable. The archaeological record contains powerful evidence that the Arab expansion preceded the formation of anything like an established and completed Islam. Arab coins issued in the conquered lands, for example, show no evidence of Islamic inscriptions, which later become normative, until the 8th century. Nor does the text of the Quran become anything like definitive before the 9th century, which it surely would have if the document had already been completed in the Prophet's lifetime, and composition or revelation functioned as the little green book of the Islamic Revolution. Historical critical methods suggest a different perspective. The Arabian Peninsula has an unforgiving ecosystem, most of which could support human habitation, much less urban civilization, only on the basis of trade. The critical commodity in this regard, at least until the development of the coffee trade much later in the region's history, was frankincense, which was collected from trees which grow in the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, in what is now Yemen and Oman, and in the Horn of Africa. The Roman Empire, after centuries of paying tolls and tributes to pass through the Arabian Peninsula, eventually developed a sea route around the peninsula and locked the Arabs out of global trade networks. But the decline of Roman power after the 5th century presented the Arabs with both an opportunity and a challenge. On the one hand, they had a chance to break out of the peninsula and gain significant territory, and to secure a more favorable position in global trade networks. On the other hand, they could not do this without finding a way to overcome tribal divisions and unite. It is in this context that the emergence of Islam must be understood. Working largely from Greek sources, contemporary scholars argue that the initial preaching of Muhammad, whose historicity they did not question, was essentially a Jewish-influenced messianism aimed at uniting all of the Semitic peoples to overthrow Roman or Byzantine hegemony and liberate Jerusalem. Because of the centrality of the idea of a common Abrahamic heritage, they called this early movement Hagirism, after Sarah's handmaid, who was the mother of Ishmael, legendary father of the Arabs. Some historical sources suggest that Muhammad lived much longer than Islamic tradition acknowledges, and actually participated in the liberation of Jerusalem. That done, however, the Arabs soon fell out with the Jews and began trying to carve out for themselves an independent religious identity, drawing on elements of Jacobite and Nestorian Christianity, Samaritanism, and Persian and Greek philosophical traditions, as well as the Rabbinic Judaism, which formed their point of departure. Islam emerged only gradually as various groups vied for leadership. These included various types of religious scholars, on the one hand, ulema or jurists, mutakallim or theologians, and practitioners of falsafa or philosophy, and generals on the other, as well as groups claiming descent from or designation by the prophet or his kin and or companions according to various tribal traditions. It is in this context that we should understand the differences between Islam and the other Semitic monotheisms. Where Judaism grew up in an environment of political disenfranchisement and thus had to find a way to realize the law without political power, and where most variants of Christianity gave up very early on the idea of actually building the kingdom of God on earth and redefined messianism in an otherworldly direction, thus laying the groundwork for an alliance with the Roman Empire and its successor states. Islam actually joined from the beginning a religious orientation centered on realizing the law with the political power necessary to actually do so, or at least to attempt to do so with some effect. In this sense, the defining feature of Islam is not so much its radical monotheism, but rather its injunction to command right and forbid wrong. As with the other traditions we've considered, there were some sharp differences within Islam over how best to live out this injunction. Some emphasized maintaining unity and building the political power necessary to actually change the world. It was this dynamic which led to the election of Abu Bakr, who was known more for his political and military skill than for his learning or piety, as the first caliph or successor of the Prophet, and which in general favored the election of the Caliphate rather than his designation or descent from a narrow line of relatives. It was also this dynamic which provided the social basis for the eventual formation of the Al-Sunnah, the Sunni party of tradition and community, which rejected the persistent messianic tendencies of early Islam and compromised commitment to ideological purity and social justice in the name of the unity and peace necessary for building power and promoting civilizational progress. This pragmatic focus on building the power necessary in order to create a just society was, however, balanced by a recognition that unity and peace could be achieved only on the basis of a common religious identity and a higher degree of social justice than was typical of the surrounding empires. And this, in return, required a leader who was clearly preeminent in wisdom and piety. Early on, the idea of religious preeminence as a qualification for the caliphate became associated with the idea of maintaining the succession within the Prophet's family, variously defined, but usually understood as involving descent from his son-in-law, Ali, thus giving a rise to the Shia al-Ali, or the party of Ali. Given its roots in Judaism and its focus on social justice, Islam gave a great deal of attention to the interpretation of the law. This gave rise to a number of competing legal schools. There are four main legal schools among the Sunni. The Hanafi recognize in order of importance the Quran, the Hadiths or sayings of the Prophet, scholarly consensus, analogical reasoning, the judgment of the individual scholar, and local customs as authorities in making legal judgments. The Maliki recognize the rulings of the first four caliphs as an authority, as well as reasoning regarding the welfare of the community, in addition to the sources accepted by the Hanafi. The Shafi accept the same sources as the Hanafi, except that they reject local custom as authoritative. The Hanbali, the legal school followed by Wahhabi fundamentalists, reject scholarly consensus formed after the first generation of Islam, as well as individual judicial discretion. Most Shia follow the Jafari school, which allows, in addition to those sources recognized by the Hanafi, fully independent judgment on the basis of individual legal scholars. Many Ismaili Shia go further and argue that legal judgments are secondary to theological judgments, and that they are historically conditioned and subject to radical reinterpretation with changing times. There are also strong esoteric and mystical tendencies in Islam. The Sufi tradition embraces a wide range of mystical schools with many different practices, most of them influenced by Hellenism as well as Judaism, and to some extent by Persian tradition as well. The Ismailis go further, arguing that this mystical tradition is, in effect, the hidden or batin content of the Quran, which is fully known by the Imam of the age, and that the legal traditions represent only an exoteric or zahir layer of religious knowledge, a first step, as it will, to authentic wisdom.